don't remember anything. But then my memory's, disaster. So, um, what is going on here? Oh, we're going live. What happened here? All right, we're live way early.
It's because we have so many things to say.
I pressed the wrong button. All right, guys, we're going to hang out a little bit because we're live way too early. So I screwed up, me. So we will start in 3 minutes, right on time.
So as not to
So,
have dead air time, shall
yeah.
I tell the story I was telling you about your talk that changed my trajectory on my how I view the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Yeah, because I'm curious because that talk was more about Israel than it was about the Israeli-Palestinian question.
Yeah, but the way you presented what it means for a country to have the self-esteem that we do great stuff and nothing is impossible. To the
Yeah.
pursuit of what is right, nothing is impossible. For me, that got me into the rabbit hole that ended up reading years later a Lance book or winning the unwinnable war. It was that talk, and particularly that highlight a Hood Barak dressed as a woman chasing and gunning down the terrorist of the Munich massacre. For
In
some reason, that was
Beirut.
the detail.
In Beirut. Yeah. Yeah, I think I started the talk with that. So this is a talk you can find on YouTube, I think, guys. It's my rise and decline of the state of Israel. I wonder if you can find it. Rise and decline.
I remember listening to it as a podcast, to be honest.
Yeah,
And back then, I didn't have access to ARI stuff, so it was publicly available.
it's yeah, here it is. It's audio only.
Yeah.
It's audio only on I'm going to put it in a chat. It's on YouTube. Audio only. I put it up 7 years ago.
On, Only 7 years ago.
Because it was on, I think it was in the Institute someplace at the Institute. I put it up on my channel 7 years ago.
Before that, it was somewhere in a
Just somewhere.
iTunes University, if you remember these old podcast
Yeah, yeah,
platforms.
yeah. It was somewhere before that. But uh, somebody says, damn, pre 9/11, you're on. Yes, this is pre 9/11. This is a talk I gave, I think it's 1999. It was my first, no, it's not 99. What am I talking about? Can't be 99. 99 was Grand Labakan. So it's not 98. So, I mean, I think it's 2000. My first Ocon talks, it's 2000, the year before 9/11.
And just to tell people, we're
Yes,
trying to
2000
cover.
Objectives Summer Conference in Richmond, Virginia. There you go.
And just to tell people, this is not part of the episode. We're trying to cover airtime till it gets to the hour. Because okay, now it is at the hour. Now
It
we can start.
is. All right. So now we can start the podcasting pod. There we go.
Radical.
Can't start the show without the music.
Of freedom, rational self-interest,
Can you hear the music?
individual rights.
No, I can hear the guy.
Ron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Book Show on this, what is it? It's May 17th. May 17th. It is a Sunday, and we are here for the regular now, weekly Yaron Nikos show. We're on a Nikos in dialogue. And so welcome, Nikos. It's good to have you on the show. Before we get started, we've got a change for next week that we just want to make sure everybody gets. So I'm going to say at the beginning of the show, and we'll repeat it later. But next week's show will be on Saturday at same time. So it'll be Saturday 3 p.m. East Coast time. And what's the topic going to be?
The manosphere, the red pill. We haven't decided that.
Yes, it's going to be the manosphere. A topic I know nothing about. So as compared to today, I know something about the manosphere and I know nothing about. So that'll be fun. And we'll see if Nikos and I even agree on the manosphere. We might not. Somebody is eager for us to disagree. Like Alex, the first question we got is from Alex. who put in 75 shekel. And he says, what a great show. AOI discussions are a little boring due to the constant agreement. It would be great to hear you debate some topics, even if it boils down to Pat Riley's style. So
I have something to say. Do you remember the line by Dagny when James Taggart tells her, go and debate whether Erdogan metal is a product of greed? And she says something like, what makes you think that this is even up to debate? This is whether Pat Riley is the GOAT of style. He is the GOAT of style. There can be no debate on that.
So maybe there can be no debate, but yeah, style, if your standard is a typical mafioso, used car sales dealer, somebody who's trying to get one over on you. Pat Riley looks like the guy who's going to sell you that beat up old Toyota as a brand new Ferrari.
Now we'll steal a line from Fountainhead, sacrilege.
Sacrilege. So anyway, this is a major disagreement between me and Nikos that I think is going to play out over many episodes. So it's not dead yet. Anyway, we're to be continued. We're not gonna hash it out right now. But and there's a whole Celtics Lakers debate as well. So but that for another time. Let's see. So today, that's right. So next time it's a Manosphere, it's going to be on Saturday. So this is May 23rd at 3 p.m. East Coast time. And so join us for that. And again, a little bit of an unusual topic for me. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Today we're going to talk about something I've talked about many times, at least pieces of. I think Nikos has touched on pieces of it, but today we're really going to try to give you a comprehensive look, or at least as comprehensive we can do in one show. This is a big topic, and that is really the 1948 Israeli War of Independence, the Declaration of Independence, which occurred. 3 days ago, or
Declaration is on the 14th.
14th, so 3 days ago, yes.
Yes, 15th
And then,
is
the invasion of the Arab armies into Israel. So the war starts on the 15th. The war really started in 47 to some extent, but at least the Civil War. So we're going to cover all of this. Now, the challenge with covering this is if we just were going to cover the war, it would be okay. That would be okay. We could do that in a show, but you can't do that, right? Because you have to set up context, and there's massive context. And the context goes back, really 50, 60, 70 years before the Declaration of Independence. You have to go back to the late 19th century and then into the 20th century. So we're going to cover all that. We'll see how much we'll see how much of that we actually get to cover. The super chat, to remind you, is open. To remind you, Nikos and I split the super chat, so we have ambitious goals for these shows. So please take that into account. Stickers are available, and thank you, Robert, already for getting us off with the sticker. And of course, questions are particularly valued, particularly if they can help guide the show, or things you're interested in, or things you don't understand or disagree, or ask about stuff you might have heard about what happened. What is the Nakba? Why did it happen? The poor Palestinians, what happened to them? Ask questions about things that interest you with regard to this topic. That is good. So maybe where do you want to start? Because how far back?
Okay, I would say let's start very quickly. End of 80s, let's say 80-81. This is before Herzl. This is before, let's say, the Zionist movement. What is the situation in the area? You still have some Jews in the area, most of them in Jerusalem, something around, let's say, 25,000. So it is a negligible presence, but there is.
We have to remind everybody, this is under the Ottoman Empire, right?
This is under the Ottoman Empire, yes.
There's no Arab state here. There's no, there never has been. So This is a land that used to be occupied by the Romans and then the Egyptians and then various the Arabs, of course, during the Arab conquests, conquered it, but it was an Arab empire. There were no states in the Arab empire, and then of course the Ottomans, who are Turks, who came from Central Asia, conquers big chunks of the Middle East, and the Ottoman Empire is the ruler in the late 19th century, as Nikos says, small Jewish population, mainly in Jerusalem. But, sprinkled around Sfat, sprinkled around a few other places around the thing. And the beginnings of an in-migration of Jews, primarily from Russia, but in Eastern Europe, they're escaping the pogroms. But one thing important to note in the 1880s, 1890s, the Russian and Eastern European Jews have somewhere else to go. They can all, and they do, emigrate to the United States. The United States is wide open borders. They can flow, and we'll get to. I think that plays an important role starting in the 1920s when that border gets closed down, and then they don't have anywhere to go. But in this time, most of them are going all over the place, right? All over South Africa. My ancestors went to South Africa. Others went to the U.S. But so there's a small trickle in of migration coming in during this period from Europe.
Yes, and around the other important date, I would say, is 1917, because then we have some change of hands. So that area is theater of conflict of World War I. So the British prevail over the Ottomans. So a process starts in 1917. This process reaches a peak, let's say, in 1920, where now this area, the area what we would call Palestine, and back then it was called Palestine, now is in the hands of the British. Now it is part of the British Empire. By that point, there are more than 70,000 Jews. So we started with something like 25,000 before, let's say, the Zionist movement, before Herzl. Now with the pogroms, with all this, we are around more than 75,000 Jews. So now this is an area occupied by the Brits. And I want to put one thing on the table here, Yaron, that the Jews invest, although they are the minority in terms of numbers, they invest and contribute to the development of the area, not just more than the Arabs, that is, most people might already know it. They actually invest even more than the British Empire invests in the area. So even if you're an Arab at that point, for many Arabs, you're better off in Palestine working for the Jews rather than being, let's say, in Egypt. And one other thing very important, where do Jews find the land? And the answer is they buy it from the Arabs. Some of these Arabs do not live there. And some of these Arabs have as laborers Arabs who squat on the land. And what happens is when a house, for example, changes ownership, if people live there on a rent, they might have to leave. And indeed, many Arabs, quote, lose their land, but it was not really their land. It was a land they used to work on. But now this land is under a new owners, so they have to work someone else. Or maybe they would still work there. So there were some Jews who preferred to have only Jews working for them, others who had Jews and Arabs. So let's put this on the table, that already from that era, the Jews are very instrumental in the development of the area. Also, we have the establishment of Tel Aviv and so on and so forth.
Yes, and a lot of this is being funded by wealthy Jews overseas. So the Rothschilds and other wealthy Jews from France and England and Central Europe, investing money in Israel, primarily philanthropically. They view it, at least I think, philanthropically primarily. This is a way to help their fellow countrymen, fellow religionists who are being persecuted in Eastern Europe. They help them get to what's called Palestine, and they help them set up businesses. It's also a period in which there's the beginning of, and this is, you don't see this much in the history books because the history books are biased against, but there's quite a bit of industrialization going on. So you get waterworks, you get electrical generating plants. These are not primarily built by the British. even though the British are the colonial power. These are built by entrepreneurs, by Jewish entrepreneurs. And the consequence of this is that the migration flows are interesting, right? That is, you get a lot of people coming into Israel, into this territory that the Jews are making pretty successful economically, from Syria, from Lebanon, from Jordan, maybe even from Egypt. And they're finding, they're finding jobs, there. So the population, the Arab population in Palestine grows during this period, far beyond just birth rates.
And even people who don't permanently stay there, they travel as seasonal workers because there are many seasonal opportunities for work there. Since we mentioned 1917, why did we start from there? Also, there's another important moment, the Balfour Declaration. What is that? Well, the British are promising different things, of course, to different people, but for the first time, there's a statement by the British Empire mentioning that Palestine can become a national home for the Jewish people, a national home. Now, what does national home mean? Does it mean a state? Does it mean a place where you're not going to get killed? For the Zionist movement, they get it as a statement that we are doing well, here we are, at some point, here we're going to have something like a state. So Balfour Declaration 1917, important moment.
What do you think motivated Balfour? What was the motivation of the British? I mean, the British this was part of their empire. They already by this point are thinking they're going to unwind the empire. That is, the empire is already in decline, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what happens to all these lands? They're divvying up the rest of the Middle East, right? Iraq is a creation of the post-World War I era. Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, none of these countries ever existed. There's no, right? These are all creations of the British and French, as they leave the Middle East, as they winding down empire. But what motivated Balfour and the British to consider the Jews for this area in Palestine?
I don't have a good answer to that, but my understanding is that it would be a good post-colonial, not to the way we use it today, outpost, somewhere, an ally you could trust. That's my understanding, but I haven't got a better insight. I'm not an expert on this. What's your answer?
I mean, I think Jews lobbied for it. I think that there was a real realization in Britain that there was a Jewish problem that Herzl identified in Europe, that the Jews were being persecuted and they were trying to get out. There was an attempt to find a solution that did not involve, in a sense, inviting them all into Britain. It wasn't clear where they could go. There was a lot of talk during that period about setting up some kind of Jewish homeland, some kind of autonomous region in different places around the world. And, Herzl famously was offered, the Zionist convention was offered Uganda as a place. There was even talk of setting something up in Argentina. There was a lot of talk. And I think that this seemed reasonable to the British. The other thing to note is there was an Arab population in Palestine in 1917. I don't know if you have the numbers, but it wasn't huge. The land was relatively, wasn't heavily populated. There weren't a lot of people. Most of it was, a lot of it was unusable. Like half of Israel is desert. The other half in 1917, a lot of it was swamp. There were a lot of swamps in the north, just below the Golan Heights, along the coast. There were a lot of swamps. It wasn't particularly desirable land that people that I think the British were worried about people fighting over. I think later they discovered that they were going to, but so they figured, why not, right? I mean, I think it was a way to solve a problem. I think the post kind of the what happens after we leave problem was in their minds as well, but also it's a solution to a problem that they were dealing with. Remember, Britain back then was the empire. It managed people's lives in lots of different places around the world. So I think it was a combination of all those things.
And yes, and as you hinted at, obviously the Arabs are not happy with all this. And already from the 20s, you have a serious anti-Jewish riots. And the most famous one is the 1929 Hebron massacre. When I first read about it, I thought, oh, that's basically an October 7 before the October 7. So you have Arab mobs murdering the Jews of Hebron, some of them in very gruesome ways.
Yep.
But here's another similarity with
By the
October
way,
7.
my grandfather was there. So my grandfather was got injured during the Hebron riots. He was there he had just emigrated, I think, to Israel. He was a yeshiva kid. He was fully religious and everything. And he left after the Hebron riots and ultimately ended up in South Africa. But he was actually there.
So one similarity and one difference from October 7. The similarity is that it was based on fake news that the Jews were about to destroy Al-Aqsa, the temples there. But the difference is that, and in that case, your grandfather was lucky, there were many Arabs who actually protected the Jews, which is what did not happen in October 7. There were many Arabs who actually put the Jews in their homes and put their body on the line to defend their neighbor. So 1929, we have the first actually, it's not organized, but it's massive. It's a riot which is massive enough to lead to this.
It's
and
just worth mentioning, because you raised it, that there were some Arabs during October 7th who did save Jews, the Bedouin, some of the Bedouin community, a few stories of Bedouins hiding people who fled the festival, in the desert, not Gazans, but Israeli Arabs, and of course Israeli Arabs.
Sorry, you're right. Yeah.
Some of the victims were Israeli Arabs as well.
Yeah, that's an important clarification. Yeah, sorry for the Israeli Arabs. That was unfair. I meant Gazans.
Yep.
The other moment we need to mention, the other event. Now, I mean, we skip some years, but nothing super important happens in between. In 1936, though, we have something very important. It is the Arab Revolt.
Yep.
Now, the Arab Revolt is a revolt which has many aspects. One is that it starts with one of the longest general strikes in history. So for 6 months, the Arabs declare that they will not work for the Brits or for the Jews. And what do they want to achieve? Number one, they want to put an end to Jewish immigration. And second, which is very interesting, they want to ban the sale of land to the Jews. But this is mostly land that was sold from Arabs to the Jews. So they cannot persuade the Arabs, don't sell land to the Jews. So now they want the British to pass a law that will say that you cannot sell the land to the Jews. And of course, here we see for the first time very prominent the role of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, a guy called Amin al-Husseini, a guy who looks exactly like Ryan Gosling. So if you've seen him once, you remember his face. Later, he becomes notorious because he's a collaborator with the Nazis and so on and so forth. By the way, he was picked by the British to be the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. So well done to the Brits, excellent choice. And notice also something else. We are in 1936, and at this point, we have zero Arab refugees. We have nothing of the usual Arab grievances. But already in this year, you have the first calls for jihad to expel the Jews. So many elements, religious elements, already are using a religious language to expel the Jews from the Holy Land. So also there's a strongly anti-Semitic character to the riots. Throughout these 3 years, I think the Jews lose more people than they lost in the Suez Crisis. And again, it's a significant uprising by the Arabs saying the Jews are not welcome here.
And at this point, there were almost 400,000 Jews. So there had been a significant immigration during the 1930s. And you know why? Well, I mean, it's simple. People are escaping Europe. The Nazis are in power now. The writing is on the wall, at least for anybody who's got open eyes and can see it. And they can't escape to the United States. I mean, some can. Albert Einstein can, because he's famous and he's well known and he's got a genius visa. And even then, he has a hard time. The Americans almost refuse him a visa. So there's very few places for Jews to go to. So they start emigrating in much larger numbers to Palestine. Remember, many of these Jews are, middle class, upper middle class Germans, pretty wealthy, and they're coming to a land where there's almost nothing. They're coming to work with their hands and agriculture, and build something from scratch. And so there are about 385, 400,000 Jews. There's just under probably 900,000, a million Arabs at this point in Israel. And there's a lot of debate about what we're going to do, how we're going to, the Balfour Declaration, how are we going to, are we going to leave this to Jews when we leave? Ultimately, the British are thinking, are we going to, originally Palestine included Jordan as well. So so by this point they've spun off Jordan. Jordan is separate. Jordan is no longer here. So what are we going to do with this little piece of land? And this is the first time where you start hearing about maybe we divide it up between the two. The Jews get a little piece of it, and the Arabs get a big piece of it. And I think that's kind of what comes out of these riots in 1936.
Yes. So the British, they do something that great powers still do today. Practically, they reward terrorism. So they set up a commission, the Peel Commission, to examine what is happening there and what are the solutions. So the Peel Commission gives, for the first time, a proposal for a partition. And the partition says 20% of the land for the Jews, 70% for the Arabs, 10% under British control. Now, this is a crazy good offer if you are an Arab, because also these two parts are going to have economic integration. So you have the advantage of, I'm still gonna benefit from the entrepreneurship of the Jews. They get 20%, mostly swamps, as you said, and desert, and we get 70%. And Jerusalem is under. They have some, I don't remember how they call it. Basically, what today would call an international city. How do the Arabs reply? Husseini, the Grand Mufti, declines it. By the way, if this guy was alive today, would say he's a Mossad agent. Like in every step, he makes sure that the Arabs don't get a victory. It's like, this guy is unbelievable. And their counteroffer is more violence, the counteroffer of the Arabs, more violence and more riots. Which reminds me of the second Intifada. They are giving us a state. We don't want the state. We want the Jews to go, so we riot. Mm-hmm. And this is when the Brits are arming some Jews to help them to oppose the riots. And this is a time, remember people, Britain is already realizing there's a war ahead in Europe. And they want to find a way to have as little to do with stuff over there. So they find some trustworthy Jews, some thousands of them, and they arm them. And yet they have to appease the Arabs even more, because as the war comes closer, they realize we need to have all the Muslims in the world by our side. So we have then the other important diplomatic development. Actually, on a day like this, 17th of May, the White House, the British government's white paper. The white paper basically gives everything to the Arabs. It says we're going to halt Jewish immigration. Only 75,000 of them are going to come in the next 5 years. And forget the partition. We're going to figure something out, but no, partition is off the table. Now, you would expect this is a triumph for the Arabs. What does the Grand Mufti do? Again, he declines it. He says, why 75,000 Jews coming in? 0 Jews coming in. So again, time after time. So this was the first real opportunity for a Palestinian state. And the Arabs, they're in the most official way, their leader says, no, thank you. And the leader, by the way, already keeps an eye on Nazi Germany. They have a slogan, something like, no Monsieur, no Mister, Allah in the earth, on earth, Allah in the sky, on earth Hitler. Yep. So they look at Hitler and like, okay, this guy is going to come, he's going to kick out the British, he hates the Jews anyway, so we're going to be fine. So this is the this is the development by the end of the world. I want to pause here, Yaron, and ask you a question. I want to still man the Arab grievances from this period, and I'm curious how you would reply to that.
Okay.
So let's say you have a reasonable Arab, not a crazy one, and say, look, we were here first. We are the clear majority still. We are a majority that keeps getting thinner due to mass migration we never asked for. Mm-hmm. We should have gotten a state in 1917. Instead, we got the British. And here we find ourselves wave after wave of migration. We know that the people who come have plans for our land, and probably they don't want us here. They want the land for themselves, for their Jewish state. And if they would see the future, they would actually say, and we're going to find ourselves in a few years, we are still the majority, and yet we're going to get a minority of the land. And the colonialists will give the Jews this land to atone for crimes done by other people against the Jews, not by us. So what do you expect us to do if not to riot and take up the arms?
No, I think that's right. I think that if you look at nationalist movements throughout the world, I think everybody would have probably reacted in a similar way. That is the idea that the land is, quote, ours. We still get that today, right? This is the whole argument against immigration. It's our land. You can't come here. We get to decide who comes here. So there's no question that the Arabs have an argument from a standard nationalist perspective that, you know, we should be able to decide who comes into this country. Why isn't it a country? We should have our own country. And we don't want Jews. We want just people who look like us. Right? I mean, every country in the world today is talking about in that language. So that is from a nationalist, collectivistic, kind of standard worldview. There was really a worldview, by the way, created by the Europeans, right? Nationalism is a European ideological creation. They have a case, and this is why I think there is some legitimacy to some sympathy towards them if they hadn't screwed up every piece of it since then. But from the perspective of individual rights, they don't. Now, you know, so Jews emigrated there. They emigrated freely. They didn't steal anybody's land. They didn't exploit anybody. They didn't enslave anybody. Their plan wasn't to steal land and exploit and enslave. They built, they created, they made their own way. The Arabs who moved in, emigrated in under kind of this open border that existed, were not local there. If you only look at the local Arabs that existed there when the Ottoman Empire fell, that number is very low. You know, a much larger population came in, just like the Jews came in. But they came in because of the Jews. The Jews are the ones who created the economic activity, the industry, the electricity, the raising a standard of living, the drying swamps, by the way. It has massive positive externalities, because what happens when you dry swamps? You get rid of mosquitoes, which means you get rid of malaria. So this is a land of malaria, and malaria goes away because the swamps are dried. And modern medicine and hospitals and, you know, civilization is brought by the Jews. They bring it from Europe. They bring it directly from Europe, and you know, the first symphony orchestra, the philharmonic, the opera house, all of that is built by these Jews coming in. So an individualistic Arab would look at this and say, whoa, what I see here is massive opportunities for self-improvement. What I see here is people, you know, bringing in the things that I love about Europe. They're bringing right here to me. It's costing me nothing. They're creating jobs. They're bringing technology. They're bringing the symphony. They're bringing things that any rational, individualistic human being would value. I want to join these guys. When they do the partition, I want to be on their side of the border. I don't want to be on the Arab side of the border. I want to be on the Jewish side of the border. It's richer and cooler and better over there. So, that's the individualistic perspective that sadly, is not common even today, and anyway, right? Even in America, it's not as common as it should be, right? The individualistic perspective that says, okay, what's in it for me? Oh, what's in it for me is wealth, freedom, individual rights protection, which is what a Jewish government was going to do, right? Because it was modeled after European governments. Culture, civilization. Yeah, I want the Jews. I want more Jews, not fewer Jews. And by the way, just to bring a context in today, this is my attitude towards everybody complaining about the settlements in the West Bank. Like when people say, if the Arabs were ready for peace, and if they were civilized, and if they really wanted a state of their own in the West Bank, I would say yes, do it on one condition, that they embrace the settlements. Said, yeah, we want these Jews. Let them stay here. They bring jobs. They're really productive and creative. They're going to be a minority in our country, but why would they want to dismantle the settlements and send them back home? Right? Why does a Palestinian state have to be an Arab-only state? Why can't it be a mixture, just like Israel is a mixture between Arabs and Jews? Why can't a Palestinian state be a mixture? So when they accept the settlements as part of the Palestinian states and give them Palestinian citizenship, that's when I know they'd be ready for a Palestinian state.
So we can have a separate episode evaluating the Palestinian grievances. Just one comment on what you said. Tragically, even the founding fathers of Israel did not make the moral case for Israel. So Ben-Gurion, in dialogues and discussions, he basically tells people, I understand the Arabs. It makes sense. It's basically right versus right. And between rights, power decides, as Mark said. Obviously, Ben-Gurion and his others like him, they were socialist, old type socialists. So this was the language. They understood.
But that is true of international politics, right? In international politics, it's almost always the case. You can see it right now with Trump and Xi. Might makes right. That is it. That's all there is, right? If I'm strong, I get to dictate the terms. And that's what matters. Morality has nothing to do with it. A moral, even some of the comments on some of the videos I've done, a country has a moral right to exist, people say. They're outraged. It's like, no, if you can defend it, it's yours. If you can't defend it, it's not yours. That's it. It's the power of weapons. It's the power of force, which determines everything. So, yes, it's not surprising they couldn't defend it morally. I mean, who can defend the moral right of any state today to exist anywhere? The kind of moral language just doesn't exist.
Moving on, because we're still not even now we're entering the 1940s. So now the World War is happening. And the big news at this time is the struggle, obviously, against the Nazis. Both the Jews and the British are preoccupied with that. And an interesting contrast. You have Haganah. Haganah, by the way, is the Jewish militia, which becomes something like a shadow army of the upcoming Jewish state. So you have Haganah units fighting alongside the British army. Actually, Moshe Dayan loses his eye in such an operation somewhere, I think, towards Lebanon, fighting against Vichy France.
Yep.
And at the same time, the leader of the Arabs of Palestine is BFF with Himmler, and he's trying to recruit Muslims in Yugoslavia so that they can fight with the Wehrmacht.
And he lives in Germany. He's living in Germany. He has a nice Nazi uniform.
And actually, it gets worse because after the war, he's set to go to Nuremberg, obviously. And the French, almost 20-something years before they put Khomeini on a plane to send him to Iran, they take the Mufti and say, this guy, he shouldn't be Nuremberg. He should be there sticking it to the British imperialists, because the French and the British, they have conflict of interest, let's say, in the area. So they release the Mufti and they send him back to the Middle East to continue his work, which is basically trying to exterminate the Jews. This is what he was trying to do while he was best friends with Himmler. He actually also had met Hitler himself. But anyway, after the war, the main enemy now is, though, the British Empire. Remember, we are under the white paper, which means there is no partition plan active in the moment. So here you have, let's say, a conflict which in the mind of many leftists today is completely erased, which is a proper anti-colonial conflict by the Jews against the British. And this conflict is fought by Haganah, which is, let's say, the more, quote, quasi-official side, but also all other bodies, other groups, such as the Irgun. You might have seen it as IGL, or the Stern group, the Lehi. Now, these last two groups, we're going to see them again because they're going to do stuff that are very controversial and outright, in some cases, outright criminal. So, or let's actually already mention it now. Yaron, sure people will mention it. We have the King David bombing, where the Haganah, the other two groups is the Irgun.
This is the Irgun primarily.
Is the Irgun, yes.
Menachem Begin, who became prime minister later, was one of the leaders of the Irgun during this period.
And they blow up the hotel, which was the headquarters of or an important central point of British administration, killing also many innocents and also many Jews. Now, they claim they given a warning. The warning was not listened. And the other notable case is a couple of years later, the bombing of the Semiramis Hotel. They thinking that that's where the Arab headquarters are, but again, many people are killed. Turns out it was not Arab headquarters, so the Haganah had to apologize, and a Spanish diplomat is killed. So, Yaron, what's your reply to the people who say, "Oh, this is the stain at the founding of the Jewish state, that initially it is a terrorist movement, which then is rewarded with a state. So why do you say we shouldn't reward the Arabs for their terrorism? Why should we reward the Jewish terrorism?"
So what this is a anti-colonial war. It's a war against the British to try to kick them out of Palestine, and it's a war. In war, people die. It's a war of liberation. This is, in a sense, the beginning of the war of liberation. Now, there's the reason there are three different organizations is partially because during the 1940s, while World War II is going, the Haganah cooperates fully with the British. The Irgun and Lehi don't want to cooperate with the British. They still see the British as the enemy. So they are actually fighting the British even during World War II. Well, and there's even some, and somebody might raise it in their questions, there's even some outreach by Lehi towards the Nazis, thinking that if we can weaken the British, that's a good thing. They quickly realize what the Nazis are doing in Europe to Jews, and they stop it, right? So they back away from it. But they really view the British as the enemy. The British are occupying what they consider now their land. They want to establish their own state in this land. The state they want to establish is going to be, even if you take the most extreme of these organizations, though all pro-Western, pro-freedom, they're all basically liberal democracies, if you could call it that, something on the spectrum of a free state. And at least with regard to the King David Hotel, this is the headquarters of the British Army, or one of the headquarters. The British Army is active in the hotel. It's a legit target. The fact that there are civilians there as well it's just like, what do people always complain about? Human shields, the civilian human shields. Well, you could argue the British Army was using the hotel as a civilian human shield to prevent an attack on it. So I think it's a legitimate target. I don't know about the other hotel. I mean, look, does everything the Lehi and the Irgun in particular do legit? No. I mean, they probably do some things that you and I would say, you know what, this is an illegit, even in a struggle for independence, there are acts that are borderline terrorism in the sense of killing civilians for the sake of intimidation. So this is happening. This is a small minority among the total actions that are taken during this period of time. They kidnap soldiers. They do things that are definitely borderline in these cases. But these are, again, small groups. This is not the essential movement towards freedom, and they're fighting a pretty brutal enemy, which is the British. The British are not nice in fighting back. That is, this is a real colonial power suppressing and oppressing people.
Yeah, ask the Cypriots how the Brits can be as masters. And the Lehi, which, by the way, if you get in a rabbit hole, their ideology is absolutely creepy. It's a weird, it has elements from Bolshevism, elements from, anyway, they're basically 300 people. It's not, it's a very small, it's a very small group.
And Irgun is based on the writings of a guy named Jabotinsky, who is actually quite good. If you read him, he's much more of a capitalist and he's much more of a Republican. In the Republican form of government sense than the state of Israel becomes, and intellectually, he's quite an interesting thinker. So he's not something to be dismissed. Lehi is a splinter off of the Irgun, which is a bunch of crazies. I mean, it is pretty radical and a little out there. But again, these are small. The reality is the Haganah is the vast majority. The Haganah is linked to the left. The founders of Israel were all leftists. And that is the primary driver. I mean, there are acts of violence between the Haganah, the Lehi, and the Irgun. There are acts of violence between them.
We'll get to that. We'll get to the famous boat. We'll get to that incident in 48. So after the war, we have a very important diplomatic development. So there's an American-British commission, and they say, okay, we have to see what we're going to do with the land. So what they do is they go actually and visit the leadership of the Arabs. They visit Ben Gurion, and most importantly, they visit the reality of the ground, of the land. So they visit Jewish communities. They're impressed. They visit Arab communities. They're not impressed, particularly because the Arabs don't want to meet them. Again, the Mufti does the job of alienating the Arabs from the international community. So they realize, the international community, they realize that we cannot sacrifice this community that has achieved these things for this community that is, it's not promising, to put it mildly. And yet, at the end, again, they call for the binational state, so not a partition, one state and figure it out. Guess what the Arabs do again? No, we don't even want this. They resume their, they are also in a struggle against the British. So that's also around the time of the King David Hotel. So quite violent years. And this violence means that at some point, the Brits are hopeless. And around 1947, they pass the hot potato to the UN. This is, by the way, the time they also abandon Greece. There's a civil war in Greece, and they tell to the Americans, look, we cannot help the Greece, you deal with this. So equally, they go to the UN and say, you deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, Britain is folding its empire. It's doing it in a hurry. You've got the Pakistan-India thing, which is a whole complete disaster in which millions of people die. I mean, and the British are basically they just want out. They don't want the mess that is involved in. But it's also important to note here that during this period, this is post-Holocaust, 1945 to 1947, there's no immigration, again, of Jews. The white paper still holds. So literally, people are leaving the concentration camps in Europe, the survivors. They've got nowhere to go. I mean, they can't go, there's no home. There's no way to go back. Some go back to their little villages in Poland who are now occupied by the Soviet Union. But the Poles there, violently push them out. They've taken over the Jewish shops. They've taken over the Jewish homes. They don't want them back in the village. They're not going to stay in Germany, almost all of them. And yet they've got nowhere to go. The Americans won't take them. I mean, let's be very clear. American border is shut to Jewish immigration. There's nothing. And they can't go to the UK. The Brits don't want them. So a lot of people, I mean, it took me a while to realize this, but a lot of people who survived the Holocaust, who have survived the concentration camps, are stuck in Europe. And they're basically kept in camps in Europe. And then they figure out a way to run away, and they get to the border, they get to the Mediterranean, and they get on boats, and they sail to Palestine, where they expect they can be free. And the British literally stop them, and they set up camps in Cyprus, and where they take all of these refugees and they put them. So these are Auschwitz survivors are now in a camp in Cyprus with barbed wire to prevent them from making it into Palestine. A few of the boats make it, right? Some of them smuggle in and they make it, illegal immigrants. But many of them land up on the shores of Cyprus, and many others never managed to leave Europe until much later. So I think it's important to note that there's a real demand of Jews to go somewhere. And yet the British are still stopping in migration in spite of everything that's happened during the Holocaust.
And in Poland, it's not just that the Jews are not welcome. There are hundreds of Jews that are actually killed after the Holocaust by locals. Two other developments in that time. As you said, the Holocaust is casting a heavy shadow. So Truman, who is now the president after FDR dies, from I think 1946 already, Truman says, look, we need to have a partition. We need to have something there, to make things happen there. And the unexpected ally that they find is Soviet Union, of all places.
Yep.
So in Yalta, FDR throws a line to Stalin. So I'm like, look, I'm kind of a Zionist. And Stalin says, I'm also a Zionist. And then he starts in the same breath. He adds a barrage of anti-Semitic, they're profiteers, they're parasites, but we understand they need to have their land. So the Soviet representative in the UN, Gromyko, who is going to play also a role in the Cuban Missile Crisis, we can do a whole episode on that, he's supporting, he says, ideally one state, but that's probably not going to happen. So actually, two states. And now, obviously, why the Soviets do this? They want to put a wedge on British imperialism. So the idea is, yeah, these are also potential allies. So
potential allies. I mean, these are Ben-Gurion is a former communist. Almost all the founding fathers of Israel were socialists. And some were, at least had originally in their youth, certainly, being communist. A lot of the migration in the early 20th century, very early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire, were communists in Russia who felt it's never going to happen in Russia, right? We'll never have communism in Russia. So they go to Palestine to set up these little communes, the kibbutzim, which are these little communes where they can live communism. And then even after the revolution happens in Russia, this is now real communism. We need the real thing. And they go to Palestine to bring the real thing. Now, by the time Israel was founded in the mid-40s, almost none of them are communists. They've grown out of it. They've realized, no, I mean, it doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work at scale. It doesn't even work in the local little kibbutzim. And they've moderated their views. But they all started out as communists. And the Russians thought, the Soviets thought, they could be an ally. And by the way, one of the reasons Truman might have supported this as an attempt, he thought if only the Soviets support them, they'll go the Soviet route. We need to balance this off, right?
And yeah, actually, if you see the emblem of the Workers' Party, the Rafai, I don't know if it's even still around, but back then the emblem was basically a sickle and hammer in a different combination. So yep. It's and also, let's say there were Haganah training camps in at least 3 socialist countries, definitely Czechoslovakia, definitely in Hungary, and I think also in Poland. So there's this very brief period where the satellites of Soviet Union are actually friendly.
All the weapons the Jews have during this period, particularly once the Brits leave and during the War of Independence are primarily coming in from Czechoslovakia. They're coming on they're coming out of the Eastern Bloc. The United States, importantly, I don't think people know this, but the United States basically has an arms embargo. They don't want to take sides, supposedly. So they embargo the whole region, and they don't lift the arms embargo until the 1960s under Kennedy, and really they don't lift it until 1967, fully lifted until 1967, until the Six-Day War. So this idea that United States is in the pocket of the Israelis and the Jews throughout its history is kind of science fiction if you know the history.
And also, even within the American government, the Foreign Office under Marshall has a line of its own compared to Truman, and Truman gets very angry with Marshall. But anyway, to fast forward a bit, because so I'll skip. Anyway, somehow in 1947, the UN says, look, here's an idea, partition plan.
Yep.
Jews will get 55%. Now, someone could say, but 55, that's more than the Jewish population. Keep in mind, it's mostly desert, and also keep in mind, this is with an eye to receiving many refugees, Holocaust survivors. So there's going to be eventually more Jews.
But literally half of it is desert, because they get the whole southern part, which is desert, and then they get their population centers elsewhere.
Exactly.
Arabs get 45%, but Jerusalem is an international city. It's under UN charter, so nobody runs Jerusalem.
Nobody runs Jerusalem, so Arabs get something like 42%. Jerusalem and Bethlehem are international land, and also importantly, people are free to move from one side to the other. The implicit understanding: let's make sure they are as homogeneous as possible. Obviously, Jews will want to stay with the Jewish state, the Arabs with the Arab state. The Arab reaction is, and I quote, "the blood will flow like river." So everyone knows at that point there's a war coming. And already now, the surrounding Arab states, we're going to talk a bit about the Arab states, who they are, but all come together and tell the world, because the UN has put this on the table, but it hasn't been voted yet. So the Arabs say, look, we give you a warning. If you vote on that, there's going to be war the next day. And who are the Arabs very quickly? So you have Syria and Lebanon, which on paper they're republics. Why? Because they're under French influence. You have Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Yemen, which are old-style kingdoms. And you have Egypt and Iraq, which are, let's say, protectorate, constitutional monarchies, used to be British protectorate. Now, we are going to talk later about the inter-Arab divisions, because they're going to be important in the war later. But the important thing is that in November 1947, you have the most important decision in the UN, which is the partition plan. Anything on that, Yaron, before we go to the results of the UN vote?
No, I mean, Iraq, remember Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, with the exception of Egypt, all these countries are relatively new. They're all creations of French and British colonialism. There is no historic, none of those states historically has existed. And their leaders, maybe we'll get to this in a bit, their leaders are all being assigned by the Brits or the French, right?
And they hate each other.
They hate each other, yes. And they're all rivals. Egypt is the only state with a history, and it has a monarchy, and the monarch has been there for a while, and it has a history. But everybody else, and of course, they were all at each other's throats.
And something important to understand what's going to happen in a few months in the war, while the Arabs, all they do is give threats, and actually also organizing a volunteer army of irregulars, basically, to go in Palestine. The Jews are doing miracles. So a guy called the Yehuda Vriel, he flies to the US. Remember, at that point, Haganah basically has only rifles. And Israel is not allowed to buy weapons, even from Czechoslovakia, because it's not a state, and only states can buy weapons. So they have to forge some documents and say, I think it was for Ethiopia or something like that. But the most impressive stuff happens in the US. So they go to the United States. They find scrap materials from old factories. They disassemble them. They put them in random combinations. They send them to Israel. And then from memory, they have to reassemble them, hide them, to prepare for the war that is going to come in a few months. So this is a testament to human ingenuity and entrepreneurship, how the Jews prepare for the upcoming war. Also, I thought the most glorious fundraising tour in the US was my fundraising tour for ARI last year. It was Golda Meir, turns out, in 1947. She goes there and she comes back with double the amount of money that Ben-Gurion expected. Okay, shall we go to the
November? They vote on it, and UN votes on it, and it's not an easy win because obviously the Arabs are voting against it, and they're rallying many countries to their cause. But since the Soviet Union and the United States are both voting for it, the resolution passes. The Jews in Israel are eagerly awaiting this result, and as soon as it happens, they're literally out in the streets celebrating. There are photos and videos of people dancing in the streets all over. The opposite is happening among the Arabs. The Mufti, I think, at this point is in Egypt.
He's outside of the country.
He's outside of the country, but they're already scheming on how to stop it and how to increase the violence. And the violence actually starts the next day.
The next day,
on a bus on the way to Jerusalem that gets shot up. So the blood starts flowing literally the next day as the Jews are still recovering from the celebrations the night before.
Of course, Ben-Gurion, he was not celebrating because, I mean, obviously he was happy, but he knew, okay, guys, now it's time to prepare for war. So another super important thing that happens around the void is that the British announced that they will depart within a few months. Eventually, the date would be the 15th of May. So after the UN votes for the partition, Ben-Gurion knows, I have 5 months to prepare for a war against potentially 7 different nations. Turns out there won't be 7, but in his mind, potentially it could be 7. And all this at the time when the Jews could not even carry a single pistol on them. So let that sink in, people. He has to prepare an army when the Jews are not even allowed to carry pistols. So they have no tanks, no airplanes, no proper artillery, and yet they have to prepare for an upcoming war. But turns out the war, as you said, starts the next day. And this is the stage of what we should call the civil, let's say, war. So it's a war within Palestine between the Haganah and between Arab irregulars, the Arab Liberation Army. So indigenous Arabs, also with volunteers from the outside. And a highlight there is the battle for Jerusalem, for the siege of Jerusalem, sorry. But I'll let you probably know way more on that.
Well, but also remember the British are right in the middle of this. So yes, there's a violence between the Jews and the Arabs, but the British are right in the middle. There's a lot of blaming of the Jews are blaming the British for siding with the Arabs. The Arabs are blaming the British for siding with the Jews. The British don't know what to do with themselves. They're completely panicked at this point. They don't know how to resolve the situation. They generally, it seems, take the Arab side more frequently, but they're in a mess. They're in a mess, and they're trying to get out of it. Yes, Jerusalem is a city where a lot of Jews still live. They've lived there since the beginning of time, really. They've always lived in Jerusalem. It's one place where Jewish presence has always been. There is a relatively large Jewish population outside of the city walls. If you've ever been to Jerusalem, it's surrounded by this ancient wall, which is not as ancient as one would think, but it was reinforced different periods. The Jews are the first ones to start neighborhoods outside of the city walls, and they are outside the city walls. But there's almost no the very few Jewish settlements, so any kind of towns or cities between Tel Aviv on the coast and which where most of the Jews now live and sprinkled across that area into in the north, there's nothing between that and Jerusalem itself. So there's a thin corridor with one highway, basically, one road, a single lane road that goes from Tel Aviv or from the center of Israel up towards Jerusalem. Jerusalem is up in the mountains. Tel Aviv is, of course, at sea level, so it's difficult to get up there. And really, Jerusalem is surrounded by Arab settlements, Arab towns, Arab villages. And the road that is leading to Jerusalem is along the road mostly to this day. If you drive that road, almost all of them are Arab towns and Arab settlements. So violence immediately starts in Jerusalem, and the Arab tactic is basically to surround the Jewish population in Jerusalem and to try to starve them, to try to force them, to kill them, or to force them to leave. And so it is surrounded. They also block the main road going up to Jerusalem is completely blocked. There's no way to get through it. Again, the Arab villages on both sides. The situation for Jews in Jerusalem becomes really, really dire in the first months of 1948.
And the Arabs want to have this chokehold around Jerusalem, not only to starve them, but also to make sure they die of thirst. If they had achieved that, then the war would be over before it even started. So what the Jews try to do is they try to send convoys of buses accompanied by the Haganah. But technically, you cannot have weapons, again, because the Brits are still there. So soon they realize that this is a losing strategy. So then they decide to go on the offensive. And this is the famous Plan D that many people have heard. So this is actually the Jews saying, we're not going to save Jerusalem this way. What we have to do is we have to chase them in their villages, basically. And my overall take from this period is this is practically a period of anarchy. And this is why this is a period where you have atrocities. Because, for example, you cannot keep prisoners of war. You cannot have prisoner camps because you are not allowed to have an army. So from both sides, this is a period where you see some of the worst crimes against civilians. And this is the period where something like 75 to 100,000 Arabs have to leave their villages. Now, some of them are doing it because they are kicked out. Some of them do it as a precaution. Some are do it before even the Jews are anywhere near. They're rich people and they want to go somewhere else. Or they realize that there are no more economic prospects and they can go somewhere else. And this is the important thing. The Arabs have somewhere to go. If your village is about to be a battlefield, the Arabs can actually go somewhere. The Jews have nowhere to go. And this is why you have a lot of Arabs leaving, some of them forced, some of them not forced, leaving to go somewhere else, because there was this option. And also this period, we have to mention this because someone will bring it up and they should bring it up. We have the most infamous case of a war atrocity by the Jew side, which is the Deir Yassin massacre. And this again was done by the Ingur mostly and the Lehi. And there's a lot of controversy exactly what happened. So the Jews claim there was some warning, but then it's not sure if the villages got it. Anyway, there was a battle and some 100 villages were killed. There's no question some of them were civilians and some of them was after the battle. So what this did is that now the Arabs had the propaganda tool. So they massively exaggerated this, that there were, sexual violence and all that stuff. But this had the opposite effect. Instead of galvanizing the Arabs, now you have many other Arab villages where say, oh, the Jews are doing horrendous things. And they left before even the war came to them. But anyway, Deir Yassin comes up all the time. By the way, let us mention, some days later, Arabs did massive atrocities here and there. The burning of the doctors, I think, going towards the Jerusalem University after a battle. But this is a period, again, where you basically have anarchy.
But
Any comment on this period, Yaron?
yeah, I mean, look, the Jews are trying to clear the road and they're trying to get supplies to Jerusalem. The Arabs are clearly trying to kill the entire Jewish population of Jerusalem, men, women, children. They don't care. It's not like they're evacuating the women and, as long as the men stay, that's okay. They want to kill everybody there. And the Jews are trying to find ways to get supplies up there. They're building an alternative road in secret. It's called the Burma Road, which is a pretty amazing logistical feat that they managed to find a way through the mountains that the Arabs don't identify initially. But they're really trying to clear the villages away from the main road because that's where snipers are shooting at the trucks. That's where the attacks are going on the road, and they're trying to clear space. This is war. And the reality is that during a war, yeah, you got to clear villages. They have strategic importance. And particularly when people are using those villages, using those civilian buildings to attack from. So were there atrocities committed towards civilians that were necessary? Very, very likely. Was there rape and pillage the way the Arabs describe it? Probably not. But there was killing of civilians that probably was gratuitous, that probably was not unnecessary. But for the most part, these villages were clear to people because the existence of the population there was a threat to the Jewish civilian population in Jerusalem. They couldn't have survived if these villages had not been cleared. But you're absolutely right. The fact that the Arabs made such a big deal, so they turned it into rape and pillage and these horrors, which did not happen. That caused many, many Arabs to run away, to say, we don't want to risk it. We've got relatives in Lebanon, we got relatives in Jordan, we got relatives somewhere else. We're just going to evacuate. And much of the so-called refugee crisis, it was, Israel did kick out a lot of people for security reasons, but a lot of them just at this point already are leaving out of fear, right? And fear is a legitimate reason to leave. Just if you lose the war, don't expect to come back.
And something which is a myth which is not true after all is that the Arabs were telling them leave and because we are getting in the war. So there was no radio broadcast by the Arabs telling them to leave. But something that did happen is that in the Battle of Jaffa, the Arab leadership is evacuating the city without a reason. And the Jews are telling the Arab civilians, you don't have to leave. So in this case, you have an urban environment. It's not a strategic threat. So you have the very weird situation, the Jews telling to the Arab civilians, don't leave, or in the first days, you can come back. And the Arabs themselves telling them to go because they're afraid for their lives. But this becomes a big problem for the Arabs, the people who are leaving. So actually, King Abdullah had to make a radio broadcast and say anyone who leaves is basically a traitor, and something like that.
But this actually happens more than just in Lod. I mean, in Haifa, the Arab National Committee of Haifa, acting on instructions supposedly from the Arab High Commission, based in Beirut, and I think with input from the Mufti, and who I think was in Cairo at this point, is telling the civilians to evacuate. And in a few days, tens of thousands of Arabs leave Haifa. And the Jews are literally saying, just like in Lod, don't leave. The Jewish mayor of Haifa at the time, along with the British, are pleading with the Arab population to remain and to stay. And at the end, 5,000 to 6,000 Arabs stay, the rest leave. And at that point, Arabs were a majority of the population in Haifa. So there are multiple occasions in which Arab forces are encouraging Arabs to leave for a variety of reasons. Most of the Arabs in Haifa go to Lebanon because it's the closest country. It's just up the coast. But it does happen more than once that so some of them are kicked out because they're sitting on strategic locations. Some of them are kicked out probably because the military forces, the Jewish military forces, are moving through the area and want them out. Some of them are kicked out, leave because they're afraid, and many of them leave because they're encouraged to leave. And I think all of those reasons add up to the massive exodus of Arabs from Palestine at the time.
So at that time, we have, yes, around 70 to 100,000 people. So still not the majority. The majority will live with the actual war. Anyway, so the first part of this conflict ends in a triumph of the Jewish population. The Arabs are pathetic in their military performance. Karma is a bitch. Their leader was someone who was a former Wehrmacht colonel, and the Arab Liberation Army has a very, very bad performance. The Mufti has not many friends, so there are also a lot of inter-Arab feud. Some of that going back to the riots of the 30s and even previous tribal conflict. So this, let's say, civil war sets the Jewish community in a good place because remember, everyone has an eye. What's going to happen when the Brits leave? That's when the actual war is going to start. So if the Haganah hadn't gotten these strategic outposts, they would not be ready for the incoming armies. So indeed, 14th of May, Ben Gurion declares the establishment of the state of Israel, and then May 15th we get to the main Arab invasion. So any comments on that first period, or shall we get to the main war?
Yeah, I mean, look, many of these Arabs leave before the declaration. In that sense, they make it easier for the Jews to fight the Arab armies because they've got fewer Arabs internally to deal with. They've got less problems. The victory in opening up Jerusalem is massive. You're right. Without that, it's not clear what happens. There's a good chance the Jews lose that war. But just going back to the Haifa example, this happens in April 28th of 1948, right? 25 to 30,000 Arabs leave. There hasn't been a shot fired in Haifa yet, right? The civil war hasn't even come to Haifa. But imagine if the Jews have to fight that war inside Haifa at the same time as they're trying to protect the borders. So this is a huge defeat in advance for the Arabs. The fact that they leave peacefully, right? They all just march out of Haifa. Later there are going to be some battles in Haifa, but it's made much easier by the fact that there's a much smaller Arab population.
So here comes the time then that Israel declares its independence. And here's the problem for the Arabs. All the Arab state leaders, because they want to appease the Arab street, have made very grandiose bellicose statements. And they have promised we're gonna do this and that. The king of Saudi Arabia declared that my last wish is I want to die as the head of my troops who is gonna fight in Palestine.
Yep.
Fast forward, he didn't send even like a thousand men. So the Arabs among themselves, they have very bad relationships. So you have the Hashemites, that's a dynasty in Iraq and in Jordan. But the Egyptians and the Saudis and the Syrians hate the Hashemites.
Well, partially because the Hashemites think that they should rule Saudi Arabia. I mean, this goes back to Lawrence of Arabia. The Lawrence of Arabia, or the British during World War I, promised Saudi Arabia to more than one family. Obviously, Saud family, but also the Hashemites. So the Hashemites think they should be rulers of Saudi Arabia. But then the British say, well, we already promised it to Saud. You can't be in the Saudi Arabia. So in a sense, Iraq, first Syria, right? They give Jordan and Syria to the Hashemites as a consolation prize, right, for not getting Saudi Arabia. And then they put this king in Syria. It was a Hashemite, and the Syrians don't want him. The Syrians hate his guts, so they have to move him and put him in Iraq. So he leaves Syria, the king of Syria leaves Syria, and they put him in Iraq. But the Hashemites don't belong in Iraq. The Hashemites have no presence in Iraq. It's just they're completely from outsiders. They're from Saudi Arabia ultimately. Jordan, there's kind of a relationship, but there's nothing in Iraq. So ultimately, he's kicked out as well, and you get the Ba'ath Party. But But yes, both they hate each other's guts. Their very existence is all dependent on colonial deals. The Egyptians ultimately are ambitious because they've always been the empire, right? The Egyptians have always ruled the Middle East, and they're ambitious. They would love to be able to take Palestine. They want that coastline. They think it's theirs. And so they're eager to go. The Jordanians think, what the hell? This should be easy, right? It's a very narrow from the river to the sea, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, very narrow. We can just take that. That's easy. The Syrians are looking at it and saying, wait a minute, we're not going to leave it to those guys. We want a piece of this as well, and we could easily take northern. And the Lebanese are kind of, I don't know what the Lebanese are thinking. The Lebanese are kind of, as usual, they're not very committed because they don't really have an army, and they have their own internal problems. And I don't think the Christians particularly want to go to war. And
So
then the
all these,
Iraqis are way behind, right? They don't even have a border with Palestine, but they're going to come in because of the Hashemites, the relationship with the king of Jordan. So it's a mess. All of them have their own ambitions. They're not coordinating between each other. They're backstabbing constantly each other as they go to war.
and Jordan of all these countries is the only country that has an actual army that has actually fought a war, and that army is the Arab Legion, which participated in World War II in some British operations. So they're
And
actually
they're trained by the
having
Brits.
and they have
And
British
I'm
officials.
surprised the Egyptian army didn't fight in World War II in North Africa.
Yeah,
Because they were trained by the Brits as well. So all these armies, funnily enough, were trained by the Brits. Not a good testament to British training.
and the French, the Syrians and the
French.
Lebanese, I think, were trained by the
Yep.
French.
Yep.
So basically, some of these countries has fear of missing out. Particularly Egypt does not want Jordan to get the. Now, Jordan, though, I'll give them this. So before the war, Golda Meir goes twice, I think, to meet the Jordanian king, and they get into some form of understanding that says that, look, the king says, I want West Bank and part of Jerusalem. And as we'll see with the war, this part of the war ends relatively quickly in the first, the Jordanian front. And it's relatively a proper, let's say, rules of conduct war. They're not like there's respect for the POWs and things like that.
I mean,
But
they slaughter their settlements deep inside what today is the West Bank. There's a Gush Emunim, I think it's called. There are Jewish settlements, and the Jordanian army just massacres them. So, but yeah, relative to some of the other armies there, the more civilized army there, and King Abdallah, the father of King Hussein, is a pretty reasonable guy who kind of gets it. I mean, Israel could have probably cut a deal with him if he was really running Palestinian affairs. I mean, part of the instead of the Mufti, he actually was one of the Arab rulers who kind of saw, okay, well, we could live with the Jewish state. He never went for a peace deal because he knew what would happen to him if he did. But I think he realized that this was not a net negative for the Middle East and for his own country. But yes, that part of the war, once Israel had captured Jerusalem and had a path to Jerusalem, that part of the war pretty much settled down pretty quickly.
And you mentioned the Grand Mufti. The very funny detail here is that the Palestinian leadership does not want the invading Arab armies. Everyone has in their mind, they come to save the Palestinians. The Palestinian leadership does not want them, and they hate each one of these rulers. They hate each other, but they also hate the Grand Mufti.
Yep.
The Ryan Gosling looking guy. Because he has zero allies in the area, and he doesn't want the intervention because he knows that all these states just want to grab something. And which are these states? So the states that actually invade are Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq sends an army through Jordan. The Lebanese, some troops, nothing major happens. and the Saudis send some like troops, but I think they're not even autonomous. They fight under the Egyptians. Anyway, so I'll leave it to you how the war goes. You know better to sum it up.
I mean, basically, I think a lot of the main brutal fighting happens both on the Syrian front and on the Egyptian front. Primarily, I think in Egypt, the Egyptian army tries to break through. There are these Jewish kibbutzim and settlements, this is primarily desert area, not far from Gaza, where brutal battles happen, but the settlements dig in and they fight back, and they are facing unbelievable odds in the sense that the Egyptian army has tanks and they have mechanized vehicles and they have a trained army. And what happens with the Jews is, once Israel is established as a state, the camps in Cyprus opened up, and all these, malnutrition, half-starving Jews get to come into Palestine from Cyprus. And as they get off the boats, they're handed a gun, and they're sent to the front. But these people are handed a gun. They, for the first time in their lives, have an opportunity to defend themselves. They have just been led to the slaughter without any means of defending themselves in Europe. They know what death is like. They have nothing to lose. They've got nowhere to go. It's not like they could run. It's not like America saying, hey, come over here. We'll give you safe haven. This is it. This is all they have. So what you get among the Jews in Israel is a highly, highly motivated, under-equipped, underarmed, but highly motivated fighting force. And they beat these armies back. They beat them back inch by inch. And it's because they know exactly what they're fighting for. They're fighting, the Egyptians who are fighting have no clue why they're there, right? They don't know. These are kids from the farms down the Nile, right? They probably never even seen Cairo, never mind the world, right? They don't know what they're fighting for. They have no concept. They're dirt poor. And yet now they're supposed to capture Palestine for the greater glory of what? The same is true of the Syrians. There's no Syrian state. There's no Syrian patriotism necessarily. What are they fighting for? Who are they fighting for? What's the deal? The Jews are fighting for their lives, and it's very real. It's very visceral. They know exactly what the alternative is. They've lived it. They've left the concentration camps. They escaped the ovens. They've got a machine gun in their hand, and they are fighting for their lives. And they succeed. The Arab armies fail on every single front. And if you look at the partition line, 1947, what was offered the Palestinians and where the war ends up in 1948, the Jews take a big chunk of land that was partitioned for the Palestinians and place it under Jewish control. They clear the Galilee, which was originally, but much of the Galilee was going to be Palestinian. They clear the Galilee, which is in northern Israel, and then they clear it. The only part of southern Israel that the Egyptians take is, or was always theirs in a sense, is Gaza, which is good riddance. I think everybody's happy that the Egyptians have Gaza. I wish they had it today. Israel basically comes out of this war with borders that are far more defensible and far more logical than they were, and with a significant Arab population now living within Israel, within this new state.
Yeah, 10 to 15%, I think. And speak about against all odds. We need to remember that the people who come to Israel and fight, they don't even speak the same language. Not the same language. It's not that they don't speak Hebrew. You can have a battalion and 5 people speak 5 different languages. Yep. Polish, German, it's Czech, Russian, yep. So it's a miracle and at the same time, it's not a miracle because, again, the Arabs don't even have a plan. Their level of coordination is literally, you'll come from the north, we'll come from the south, and we're going to meet in the middle. This is literally the level of coordination, whereas the Jews don't know it's not only that they know what they fight for, but they have a good leadership, they have an integrated leadership, and they've been preparing for this war. They have good logistics. Something else which is similar with today. Every couple of weeks or months, there is a ceasefire imposed by the powers to be. After the first ceasefire, we could say after the first ceasefire, both sides benefit because the Jews, they now we have the state of Israel, now they Haganize the IDF. The IDF gets the guns that they have ordered and the new troops. But after this ceasefire, every ceasefire is basically saving the Arabs. It's like saved by the bell. Yeah. And towards the end of the war, correct if I'm wrong, the Israelis have pushed the Egyptians in Egyptian soil. Yep. In the Sinai, and the United Nations are intervening, so the IDF is running basically with a shot clock that we have to achieve particular strategic victories before they stopped us, as we've seen happening also with the other wars.
Yeah, in every war, the same thing happens basically. But yes, they are incredibly successful. Now they do get some American volunteers come, American Jews, and there's some pilots who can fly planes, and they manage to somehow get planes, and they're bombing the Egyptian columns, and they get some British RAF fighter pilots who are again Jews come and volunteer and fight in the side of Israel. So they do get some experience, people with experience fighting. But yeah, it truly is astounding. They were clearly the underdogs. I think the Truman administration expected them to be wiped out. They expected the state of Israel not to survive. That was the expectation, certainly in the Foreign Office, State Department, what we call the State Department, and yet they did. And during this period, of course, a significant number of Arabs leave. They leave the territory that is being occupied by the Jews. They leave either to Arab countries or they leave to what becomes the West Bank, and they settled in refugee camps there. There is some conflicting evidence in terms of the exact number that actually depart total, and the total number, the number of 700,000 is thrown out there, but there is some conflict about even that number and whether that number is not exaggerated. But again, a huge number of Arabs are leaving. Now, again, some, as we said before, are kicked out because they're sitting on strategic locations that are essential for national security, for the defense of the future state of the emerging state of Israel. But almost all of them, and not to say that there are zero atrocities, there probably are few, not to say that nobody is kicked out for gratuitous reasons, there probably are some, but the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of the Palestinians leave because they decide they don't want to live in a Jewish state. They leave because they are hopeful that one day they'll be able to come back victorious in one way or the other.
And the truth is, of course, that the Israeli leadership, they hope that as few Arabs as possible stay behind, which makes sense. And again, it's exactly the same from the other side. The other side also captures some Jewish communities, and they're wiped out. The interesting thing is that the first time the Arabs raised the issue of the return of the refugees is the second ceasefire, when they realize they've lost the war. So they're already, it's basically a cope. We've lost the war, but we need to find something to put on the table so that we don't get completely humiliating.
And Israel was willing to sign a peace deal and have a significant number of the refugees come back, but the Arabs would not sign a peace deal.
Yeah, so the war ended with armistice, and the Iraqis didn't even sign an armistice because they said we're not going to sit on the same table with the Jews. So, but to raise the issue of the civilian casualties, so there were something like 800 to 900, at least according to Morris, civilian casualties from the side of the Arabs throughout the war. Now, for me, I don't want to justify a single one of them if it's not militarily necessary. But just to put it into perspective, Israel, in almost a year, killed fewer civilians than Hamas killed in one day. And again, this is not, I don't even like saying this, but
Yep.
again, it's a war, and for a war, and for a war of that era, relatively, particularly the second part, relatively some rules of civility, however you want to call it, like compare this with a Soviet advancement in Eastern Europe. It's not even, or even compared with the Balkan Wars in the 90s. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's to call this, I mean, certainly I'm sure there were individual cases of really bad behavior, but they were rare. And in war, there are always cases like that. And there's no war in which this has never happened. Every American war has seen this. Every war, these atrocities, some atrocities happen. But in the context of what was going on, these are trivial numbers. 700,000 left, and maybe there were 800 civilian casualties, and that's if you trust Benny Morris, which I don't. But okay, but that would be my upper bound. I would say that would be the most I think that could be found. Part of what's interesting is of the people who left, almost the entire upper middle class and wealthy classes among Palestinians left. And they were the first ones to leave. They left in late 47, early 48, even before the war started. They were the ones that really, abandoned the place. So there's a sense in which the Arab population in Israel had no kind of political and economic leadership after the war, and they've done better than the Arabs everywhere else, right? They've done really, really well living in Israel. So about 100 to 200 left during the Civil War phase, 300 to 500,000 left during the war itself. They settled in Jordan, many of them in Jordan, many of them in Lebanon, depending on which part of many of them in Gaza, and then many in the West Bank, and those are the Palestinian refugees you hear about, or it's their, what is it, 3 generations now? How many refugees are there in the world that survived 3 generations?
So my last point, because this is going to be like the Yaron Nikos 5 hours episode. My last point will be this. So we're talking about 700,000, let's say, Arab refugees. By the way, this was also approximately a bit less than that, the amount of Jewish people who had to go from the Arab world to Israel. So you had something like a practical swap of population. And the world still cannot get over this.
Yes.
But the world very quickly got over the 1 million Greeks who had to leave Asia Minor in 22.
That's right.
Or the more than 10 million Germans who were displaced after World War II. Or God knows how many Indian and Pakistanis had to switch after that conflict.
Many millions.
Millions. The only refugees who stayed refugees. By the way, why are we talking about the Israeli refugees? Because the Jews who came from the Arab countries, they became part of the Israeli society. They didn't stay refugees we don't say the Greek refugees. They came to Greece and then they became part of Greek society. Tragedy, horrible, but life went on. But for these particular refugees, they were used as pawns. So I'm going to say it again. If you care about innocent Palestinians, you should be livid, you should be angry against their leadership, that even when the war was over and for ages after that, they keep actually tormenting them. So that's all I had for the war of 1948.
So just to give people a sense of the population, by the end of 48, there were about 800 to 850,000 people in what became Israel. About 720 of those 1,000 were Jews. The rest were Arabs. So it was about 10% Arab. Today, it's more than that. Today, the population inside Israel is about 2 million out of 10, or approximately 10. So it's about 20%. They had a lot of babies. This is the apartheid state of Israel that brings them down, and yet their population has grown. And there's some of the economically best performing Arabs in the Middle East, and certainly from a freedom perspective, the freest Arabs in the entire Middle East.
And mention also that I think something like 3 million Jews came from various places in the world. So the Jews imported basically population, and still today somehow the Arab population, which was not imported, so we don't include West Bank and Gaza, kept at somewhere between 10, 12 percent.
Yeah, and today it's close to 20. So it's yes, because they had I mean, their birth rates now are lower than the Jewish population, but for a long time they were much higher, and they had a lot of kids. Anyway, we could do a whole show on apartheid, but maybe we should. On what it is, what it really is, what it was in South Africa, and what, and whether it is in Israel. Great. All right. I think we did justice to this in an hour and a half. We could spend 10 hours on this and really delve into the history.
Not to guilt the people, I have 11 pages of notes, and we used not even half of them.
Yeah. And the whole book's on this, right? And I don't know if you ever read, did you read the Chaim Kalish book? Kalish book?
I've read, to prepare this, I mostly read Morris, and for more like light reading, the O Jerusalem book, which I recommend it. It's a great read.
Yep. Yeah. So there's a book by Chaim Kalish, who's a historian I've met. I know he was in the UK for many years, and he debunks a lot of the mythology about what happened during this era, and challenges a lot of the assumptions, and is a big time opponent and adversary of Benny Morris. So they are, so
I watched Benny Morris on Lex Friedman. I was like, why is not Yaron there? Like, this guy could not support.
He was terrible. Oh my God. Well, do you know what he was? I mean, if he's the guy. Benny Morris was the first. What did they call them? Post-Zionist. He was one of the first who basically came out and said Israel was created in sin. All this stuff is much worse than what you think. He later retracts a lot of what he said originally, but he created a whole movement in Israel among academics of historians writing about Jewish atrocities during the founding and pre-founding and the early days of Jewish settlement in Israel. And he became the main guy until the Second Intifada. And during the Second Intifada, he kind of realized, God, I mean, he once said, I don't think the Jews kicked out aggressively as many Arabs as people think. But given the Second Intifada, maybe they should have. I mean, he got to the point where he became kind of much more right wing, but he was way over on the left for a very long time. And so, if you ever want to delve into this again, Chaim Kalish is I think the best. He really takes apart a lot of the quotes that Benny Morris has. He also claims that Benny Morris mistranslates Ben Gurion and lies about the quotations, and he presents the Hebrew versus the English, and takes them out of context. And he really does a job on him. All right. Let's see. We have some super chat. And let me go through the stickers and thank people on the stickers. Barry, thank you. Martin, thank you. Stephen, thank you. Let's see. John, thank you. Chili Fan, first super chat. Thank you, Chili Fan. Bonnie, thank you. Michael, thank you. Robert, we started off with Robert.
Let me also say a thank you before we get to the super chats. I want to say a big thank you to Ryan. So last week, jokingly, half jokingly, you said someone needs to get me a standing desk. So Ryan actually got in contact, and he donated something to buy a standing desk. So maybe next time we're going to have a standing desk. So a huge thank you, Ryan. And also a huge thank you to you, Yaron, for bringing this up.
Yeah. So also a reminder, you can support Nikos on Patreon. Just check out nikos.org. Just nikos.org. It's very simple. It's and you can find the links there on how to support Nikos. But Patreon's a great way for all of us to get support, because it's monthly, it's regular. And you can support me on Patreon. So just check your Unbook show on Patreon. And yes, we're looking for more regular supporters. Of course, if you'd like to make a major gift, like buy Nikos a standing desk, contact Nikos directly, and do so. Which Ryan was it? So we give credit.
I'll just leave it at Ryan.
Okay,
I don't
well,
know if
we
he
leave it
wants
to
his
Ryan. He
surname.
knows who he is, and you know who he is. That's good. Excellent. Let's see. So we've got a few $100 super chats. All right, so I'll do the easy ones first. Wes says, I'm loving these shows. Thank you both. Thank you, Wes. Really, really appreciate the $100. That is fantastic. Glenn says, great show, really informative. Thank you both. Thank you,
you both.
Glenn. Thanks for all the support. All right, Molten Splendor. I love that name. If you're gonna have a handle, you should have a handle like Molten Splendor. That's good. Right. All right. Is it true that the word Nakba, an Arab word for catastrophe, was coined by an Arab in 1948 to describe how bad the Arabs lost the war against the Jews in 1940? Well, not in 1947, but yeah, in 1948. A word which was subsequently turned into 180 degrees into the 1990s to describe Israel as the aggressor. I mean,
yeah, there's a whole discussion, but actually you go on.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely means catastrophe. It means disaster. And originally it was coined to describe the fact that they lost the war. It was a disaster. Every element of it is a disaster. Partially the fact that they lost, but the fact that the Jews landed up with more land than what was given to them in a partition, and the fact that 700,000 Palestinians left their homes and were now refugees. So the Nakba captured all of that. This was a catastrophe from the Arab world's perspective. It was a total catastrophe, and it's absolutely the case that the first two elements, the defeat, the increase in land, and all of that, were dropped off, and all that remained was this idea of the refugees, and that story has become more and more and more a story of the Jews kicked them out. They kicked them out. They threw them out, and then when they wanted to come home, they wouldn't let them come home. The libertarian, I debated this libertarian property rights. They've got property rights. There's a war. If you start a war and you lose it, or your political leaders start a war and they lose it, they've basically negated your property rights. I mean, if the Palestinians have a claim against anybody for the value of their property, it should be against the 7 countries or the 5 countries that invaded Israel in May 1948.
But for what it's worth, I don't know anyone who would say, yeah, if someone comes up with a title and says I was a peaceful person and kicked out. And actually, I think Israel in all the peace offers, this is the easy thing to take care of. This is not the reason why the Palestinians are still fighting.
No,
it's not the
and Israel's not going to allow them back, but Israel would pay, I think, would be willing to pay some compensation property for the people who are peaceful. They'd have to prove that they were peaceful. But again, there is a consequence of losing, and this is why who your political leaders matter, right? They represent you whether you like it or not. If they start a war and you get bombed as a poor civilian, well, I mean, they're your political leaders. The enemy has a right to bomb you. So pay attention to who your political leaders are. It's not a trivial issue. It's important. So yes, Molten, you are absolutely right. All right, NYK, what is the role and influence of secular Muslims, if they exist in any form, the way secular Christians exist in the United States, or is this even a valid comparison? Well, I mean, Palestinian society certainly, if we fast forward to the 60s, in the West Bank and even Gaza, 60s and 70s, was probably the most secular Arab society in the Middle East. They were not very religious at all. It's not clear how religious they were even in the 1940s. There was a particularly among the rich. They'd been educated in kind of Western schools. The nationalism, kind of old school European nationalism and collectivism, fascism even, were much more prevalent than religion. Religion has really become a big deal since November 1979, since the rise of Khomeini. But Palestinians were relatively secular. The Palestinians within Israel are still relatively secular, although they become more religious since I left Israel. So I remember in the 80s, there were no burqas in Israel. No, almost nobody, even in the Arab villages. They wore head coverings, but not the whole black thing. Now you go to Israel and they're there. They're in Haifa. You can see so they become more religious, not less religious, sadly. And that's true in the entire Arab world. You saw an increase in religiosity during the 1970s and really in the 80s and 90s.
But again, that is not to say that the Arabs did not use Islam and
Yeah,
religion in their war, even already from 1948. So
absolutely.
already there are calls by religious authorities, respectable religious authorities in Egypt, about the word jihad is going around. So anything that can bolster the population to go attack was used, and Islam was a mobilizing factor.
Yep. Stephen, I'm a monthly subscriber and I usually can't join the chat live, but wanted to pop in and say this is a great collaboration so far. Looking forward to many more interesting topics.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I should mention again, next week, it'll be on Saturday, same time, 3 p.m. East Coast time, and we'll be talking about the manosphere. So
And maybe people should watch that documentary on Netflix with Louis Theroux. Although we're gonna do mostly a historical overview of the manosphere and how it gets related to the culture war. So that's what is of interest to us.
what is the
it's
documentary?
mostly
What's
gonna
it
be
called?
if you put Netflix manosphere, you'll find it. It's by Louis Theroux.
Okay, we'll look at it because I haven't seen it.
Okay.
All right, Richard says, thank you both for these shows. Here's my monetary vote for more. Thank you, guys. Richard also says, how do Marxists envision the AI's impact on their movement? Artificial intelligence. Is it the ultimate labor thief, an opportunity for universal income or something else?
So they would say that on one hand, this is the Marxist prophecy fulfilled. So Marx said that at some point, the means of production gets socialized so much, which basically that we live in practical communism. So you can have everything with a press of a button, just that capitalists get in
This
the
is
way.
Marx's utopia.
More like the scientific theory. So Marx wouldn't consider the utopia. He would say this is where the system is going. And he was onto something. He foresaw where capitalism is going. He just had to add this detail that capitalism will prevent it from reaching like this last step. But Marx will say that the fact that they are, Varoufakis calls it techno-feudalism. So the AI should not be owned by these techno-feudals. And my solution to Varoufakis is, hey, you could create the next ChatGPT, give it to the people, and we're gonna, if it's better, we're gonna leave aside ChatGPT. So go ahead, Varoufakis. I'm sure you can do better than Sam Altman.
Yeah, but the idea is that the robots will do everything, and you'll be able to do whatever you want. And yeah, in a sense, it's kind of a universal income, but I think they would even say, well, who needs money at that point? Food will just be whatever you want it to be. It's like Star Trek, you'll press a button and it'll just show up. The robots will provide it. There's no cost. There's no production necessary. It just happens, right? The robots produce it, make it possible. That's the beauty of AI.
Well, the funny thing is that it will happen eventually, and it will be capitalism and the human mind free in capitalism that will have produced it.
Well, and it will require a constant use of the human mind. It's not an end. There is no end in that sense, right? So then you're in the stars and you're manipulating matter somewhere else. I mean, there's always going to be nature is always going to try to kill us, and we're always going to need to be on our toes to prevent that from happening. Anne says, so glad Nikos is doing this with you. Yes, thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Enric, was a large part of the Arabs being against Jews is their secularization, modernization away from traditional Islam? So did the Arabs oppose it because this was secular and it was modern and it was all that?
Well, there is no question that there is an anti-Western element in the Arabs against Zion. So they see it as the West intruding, and they see it as something which is alien. I think that's the best way to capture it. Alien. West equals alien. The Jews are West, alien, therefore they are unwelcome. And this is slightly different from so when we're going to cover the next wars, where now the Arabs are under like Nasser and more Ba'athist type regimes, we'll see a slightly different narrative. But particularly in the first war, yes, there is this element.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's anti-Western, but again, I don't know. They use jihad. They use the idea of religion as part of it. The Jews should not live in Muslim land. That is or if they do, they're second-class citizens. There's how to deal with them, right? But they shouldn't have sovereignty in Muslim land. So there's definitely that as a part of it. Religion plays a part of it. But a lot of it is, again, there's an element of nationalism and a lot of them are influenced by the left, and they want modernization, but they want it under their terms. They want it under the terms of Arab kind of nationalism, and that's where the Arabs are heading. They're heading towards nationalism. Until that fails, we'll get to that in '67. But
which the anniversary is not that far. This could be the episode in 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. It is in early June of 1967. Let's see, Shruti. Here's to many more episodes of the Yaron Nikos dialogues. Thank you, Shruti.
This episode took me away from her because I had to research a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, real spec. Nikos, do you read Leon Uris novels? Exodus, QB7, Mila 18, etc. Can you comment on? Yeah, so that's question number one. Question number two is, can you comment on the Odysseus movie? And then the third question is, who was Greek marathoner Spiridon Louis?
Yes, so I've tried multiple times to read science fiction. I can never get into it. I've tried.
Leon Uris is not science fiction.
Which one?
Leon Uris is not science fiction. You ever read? So check out Exodus.
Oh, wait. Okay, sorry. I completely sorry. It's too late. Exodus. Is it for the boat?
Yeah, it's the refugees from Europe coming to Israel. There's a movie. It was made into a movie. It's a good book. And
it's actually, I know the story. I haven't read the book. Yeah. It's an absolutely harrowing story because these people at some point end up in Germany. So imagine they were inmates in the German camp. So imagine how they felt. I think they end up in Hamburg or Hanover or somewhere there. So yeah, it's the story of the boat Exodus. Yep. Yeah, sorry, it's a bit too late. It's midnight here.
And QB7, Mila 18. I mean, Leon Uris is an interesting kind of historic dramatizer of history. So historic novels, at least 2 or 3 of them relate to the early days of kind of the War of Independence and the Jewish state and stuff.
Oh yeah. Now I get what our friend is talking about. But no, I haven't read any of them. Okay. But I know the story of Exodus.
Second question, comment on Odysseus.
I have no idea. I haven't watched it. I'm a big fan of Nolan. The biggest aesthetic experience I ever had was watching Interstellar on IMAX. So I'm ready to cut him any slack. I'll go and watch it anyway.
You're willing to tolerate a black, Helen of Troy?
I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. But let's see. It's Nolan. He deserves every cutting of slack. And the third question, Spiros Louis was the winner of the first modern Olympics in the marathon. And to his honor, the Olympic Stadium was called the Spiros Louis.
All right. Richard says, thank you for a reply to my AI question. It exceeded my expectations. Great.
We always exceed expectations. That's why we have 11 pages of notes per episode.
Exactly. That is what you're going to start expecting from us. All right, let's see. Did we get any other? I can't remember if I thanked Stephen, Martin, Barry, and I know I didn't thank Ixit for the stickers. Thank you guys. All right, Cobb. Why did Aleksandr Dugin say last week that Russians are the real white people? It doesn't make sense. Well, yeah.
Well, why does the rest of the stuff? So Dugin went to something where he said that basically Indians are the real Aryans or something like that. By the way, when I was reading about Lehi, they were some proto-Dugians in some way. They had this very weird combination of the worst parts from the left and the right.
Not
But
surprised.
yeah, so I think Dugin is. If this guy played it better, he would be in every sociology textbook because he's basically a postmodernist.
Yeah.
But with the Russian nationalism, he loses it. Otherwise, every intellectual in the West, modern intellectual, would love him.
Yeah, he's more mystical. He's more explicitly mystical than they would be. But so he's this weird combination. But the whole question is, what does it even mean to say real white people, as compared to what? Unreal white people, as compared to mixed people, as compared to, who was the first one who got the pigment white? I mean, in his skin. I don't even understand what the issue is. So. But there is something about the Aryan people. This is the Indians are the original Aryan people. The Aryan people come from Central Asia. They split into two. Some went to Germany. Some went to India.
That's why Himmler was obsessed with the whole Indian and Oriental stuff. He sent some expedition somewhere to. Anyway, we can
And
do
the
something.
swastika is a symbol that comes from
Oh
India.
yeah.
Christian, Nikos, months ago, I asked you if you think the Gunners will win the Champions League. You were skeptical. They're now in the final against Paris Saint-Germain. Your prediction?
Look, this team is the most unbearable team to watch because they're the most defensive-minded team in the history, I think, of modern football. But they do
Really?
it so well. I give them credit on that. If you do something, this is a message to all of you people. If you do something, do it right and all the way. If you're going to have a YouTube show, give it all. If you're going to be the most defensive team, be the most defensive team. Own it. We're talking about the team that it takes them 45 seconds to do a throw-in because they want to make sure that nothing happens in the field. If it was possible, they would take the ball away and leave so that there would be no game. That's how they're going to win the Champions League? Maybe. I mean, what can we say?
Well, but we should hope not, because other teams will then emulate them and it'll make the sport boring.
Yeah, but I cannot. It's difficult for me to support a team which is basically Qatar having a club. Although I love Luis Enrique, and the truth is Paris Saint-Germain, in football terms, in what we see in the field, is absolutely magnificent.
All right, I'm not going to argue with Nikos about football. Basketball, yes, but football, probably not. Stephen, what are your plans for these dialogues? To do them.
To find every week something which will give you some value and knowledge, but also so you're going to learn something new, but also it has relevance on today.
Yes. But you'll learn a lot of history and a lot of intellectual history, a lot of intellectual movements. I mean, the first two shows have been primarily about physical history, if you will, but we're going to talk a lot about intellectual movements, particularly intellectual movements that have strong relevance at the margins of the world today, kind of pulling the world today. All right, Molten Splendor says, Nikos, in your event with Harry Binswanger, were you simply a devil's advocate? And did you agree with his responses to your examples?
The truth is, Harry thinks I was a devil's advocate, but I meant what guys. I think it makes no sense to give people context. So Harry said that we should have zero contact with the Soviets during the Cold War. And my point was, if you have a power through your mistakes, but now they have the capacity to destroy you, it makes sense to try to understand them better. And for me, it makes perfect sense that Nixon tried to to build a personal relationship with Brezhnev. It didn't work that well with Brezhnev, but it definitely went with Gorbachev. So I don't think it is a sanction if for your own benefit you try to build some sort of relationship with someone who is explicitly and is your enemy. So there's a thin line. Remember what we discussed last week. We had to be on the same bed with the Soviets in the Second World War, but the problem was that we didn't understand the essence that they were the enemy. You can understand the essence and then you can have some sort of relationship to your own benefit. This is not what the Americans did, but this does not mean that you should have zero communication with the enemy when you both have nuclear weapons and you're armed to the teeth. So Harry claimed even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the back channels, we didn't need them. Or at least that's what I understood.
Yep. All right. Roland says, thanks for a very instructive show. Thank you, Roland. And last question from Neo is, who are the Palestinians that came in after the Romans kicked out the Jews?
I have zero idea.
I don't know who. There were no Palestinians. That category didn't exist. So I'm not sure who you're talking about. When the Romans kicked out the Jews, there were people from the surrounding countries, surrounding territories, wasn't even countries, from the rest of the Roman Empire who filled in the gaps, I assume. There were all kinds of people living here. I remember the Babylonians and the Persians. They did a lot of population replacements. They took the Jews out, they put somebody else in, they moved people around, but there wasn't any kind of we don't know what nationality they necessarily had. All right.
I'm waving my head, but I know nothing on that part of history.
Yes, there's not much.
But one last thing I want to say. For me, all this does not matter. That's why I don't like the Mike Huckabee type of defense to Israel. I couldn't care less who was there 2,000 years ago.
Yep.
I couldn't care less who God promised to what. If Israel was not a rights-respecting country, if in 50 years Lebanon is, let's say, a classical liberal society and Israel is a non-liberal society, I will be making a show supporting like the moral case for Lebanon or whatever. I don't care what happened 2,000 years ago.
Yep, I agree. I agree completely. Carolina, thank you. Really appreciate it coming in. All right, reminders. Show next week is on Saturday, not on Sunday, 3 p.m. East Coast time. We will be talking about the manosphere. I'm looking forward to finding out what that actually is. Yeah, I guess I will see you guys tomorrow. Oh, tomorrow I've got an interview. We're doing 2 shows tomorrow, one at 3, and then we've got an interview at 7 p.m. tomorrow, East Coast time, with Josh Wyndham. Josh is a lawyer at the Institute for Justice, so an important group that sues the government. And we'll be talking about the cases he's working on for the Institute of Justice. So join me tomorrow, 2 shows, one at 3 p.m., one at 7 p.m. Nikos, I will see you on Saturday.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.